If you walked through Elnora's house just a month ago, you might have felt like you stepped into a living museum. Every corner whispered a story. Every shelf was packed with tokens from decades gone by. Wedding gifts, holiday decorations, unopened boxes from her late husband's office. She'd lived there for over 80 years. The home wasn't messy, it was full. But there's a quiet kind of weight that comes with holding on to everything. And in Elnora's case, it had become too heavy. But something happened. Just 2 days later, 48 hours, the same house looked different, lighter, warmer. Her granddaughter walked in and said, "Grandma, it feels like your smile finally has space." The walls echoed. The hallway breathed. The sunroom, once blocked by an unused sewing machine and piles of boxes, was now glowing again, just like it used to when her kids were young. So what changed? Elnora didn't hire professionals. She didn't use a checklist from the internet. What she did instead was bold, brutal even. She made 7 powerful moves that most people over 60 never even consider. And she did them fast. Let's walk through exactly what she did, step by step. The methods that helped her erase a lifetime of clutter, guilt, and emotional weight in just 2 days. And if you're wondering if this is possible for you, ask yourself this. Have you ever tried to declutter your home quickly, really quickly? What was the hardest item to let go of? Let us know in the comments. Your story might help someone else finally take the first step. Meet Elnora. She's 74, widowed, and lives alone in the same modest Ohio home where she raised 2 children, buried a husband, and stacked decades of life into every corner. Her driveway still creaks under the weight of autumn leaves. Her mailbox still bears her late husband's name. And inside is a time capsule of love, loss, and everything in between. Elnora isn't what you'd call a hoarder. Her house isn't dirty or unlivable. It's just layered. Quilts folded 3 deep in every closet. Cabinets with mugs from every family vacation. A garage filled with tools she hasn't touched since the early 90s. Boxes labeled for the grandkids, even though the grandkids are now adults with apartments of their own. Each item had a reason, a story, a memory. And for years, that was enough. But the moment that changed everything came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Her youngest granddaughter, Clara, had come to visit. She wandered through the house, quiet, curious. Then she sat down on the edge of the old couch and looked at Elnora, not with judgment, but with something gentler. "Grandma," she said softly, "your house feels heavy. Not messy, not cluttered. Heavy." It struck Elnora like a chord. Because Clara didn't mean physical weight. She meant emotional density. Rooms filled not with trash, but with unresolved memories. Corners that hadn't changed in 30 years. Spaces no longer lived in, just stored in. That word stayed with her all night. Heavy. And in that silence, Elnora made a decision. Not to tidy up, not to sort of drawer or shuffle some boxes, but to do something radical. To give herself permission to lighten the load. Not just for herself, but for her family. To say goodbye to the weight of just in case and what if someday. To stop preserving the past at the expense of her present. She didn't want Clara to inherit a museum. She wanted her to remember a home filled with light. That moment, that word, heavy, was the spark that lit the fire. Move number 1, the 2-day deadline mindset. I gave myself just 48 hours, no more. That's what Elnora told herself the morning after her granddaughter left. Not a week, not 1 room per day, 2 days, start to finish. It wasn't because she was in a rush. It was because she knew herself. She knew that if she gave it more time, she'd get lost in the stories. That maybe I'll keep this. Though I should ask my son if he wants that. But what if I need it one day? That's the quiet trap most seniors fall into. Not clutter, but indecision. And Elnora had finally realized that the longer she waited, the harder it became to move forward. So she picked a weekend and told no one to call, text, or drop by unless it was urgent. She turned off the TV. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee. And she started the clock. She wasn't reckless. Before she touched a single item, she made a master list of the 7 areas she needed to tackle. Not the entire house, just the spaces she used daily and the ones that held the most emotional weight. Her bedroom, the hall closet, the dining room hutch, the garage, the entryway bench, the sunroom, and the old cabinet of photo albums. Then she gave each zone a time block and held herself to it. If she finished early, she moved on. If she didn't, she moved on anyway. No do-overs. No circling back. Here's the secret. Elnora wasn't trying to create perfection. She was aiming for release. And that's something few people talk about when it comes to seniors and decluttering. The truth is, as we age, our emotional energy gets more valuable than our physical space. A deadline gives that energy a container, a place to focus. Without it, decisions drag on for years. With it, clarity comes fast. That 48-hour limit became her personal finish line. And surprisingly, it gave her peace. There was no time to wrestle with guilt, no energy to debate every keepsake. It became about what was still serving her and what wasn't. Would a 2-day timer help you stay focused or stress you out? Comment bilo? For Elnora, it was the very thing that finally got her unstuck. Move number 2, the burden box trick. Anything I didn't want my kids to have to sort after I'm gone went in the burden box. Elnora didn't start this one with a deep emotional ritual. No music, no candle, no long goodbye. She just took a sturdy cardboard box, wrote "burden" across the side in bold black letters, and slid under the dining table. That box became her silent promise, not just to herself, but to her family. Because Elnora understood something most people ignore until it's too late. What we leave behind is often more than just stuff. It's a responsibility someone else has to carry. She'd seen it happen with her own mother. After her passing, Elnora had spent nearly 6 weeks sorting old sewing patterns, church bulletins, tangled jewelry, and 40-year-old kitchen gadgets no one knew how to use. She didn't resent her mother, but she never forgot the emotional exhaustion of deciding what to keep, donate, toss, or explain. So now, at 74, Elnora made the decision her own mother couldn't. Not everything had to be passed on. Into the burden box went things that had quietly haunted her storage spaces. An old broken violin her son never learned to play, a quilt from a marriage that ended in sorrow, antique glasses no one had asked about in years, piles of family letters written in a language her grandkids couldn't read. And none of it was trash. That's the most important part. These weren't things she hated. They were just things she no longer wanted to place on someone else's shoulders. Not because they weren't valuable, but because they weren't needed. She didn't want her kids guessing what was sentimental and what was just leftover. The moment she sealed that box, she said she felt something lift. For the first time in years, the dining room felt like hers again. Not a storage space for memories she didn't know how to face. That one box, unassuming and silent, held decades of deferred decisions. And letting it go gave her deep, private peace. But the next move, this is the one her neighbor called ruthless. Move number 3, the 3-second guilt rule. If I picked something up and felt guilt instead of joy, it went. This was the rule Elnora dreaded the most. Because it wasn't about space. It was about permission. Permission to stop being the keeper of other people's expectations. Her living room cabinet was filled with shoulds. The crystal vase her cousin gave her for a wedding anniversary, she barely remembers. The framed cross-stitch from a church friend who passed 10 years ago. The porcelain angel collection her late aunt adored, but Elnora never cared for. She had kept them all, untouched, for decades. Why? Because someone she loved had once handed it to her with a smile. And that moment, not the object itself, was what she'd been trying to preserve. So when she got to that cabinet, Elnora made a new rule: no overthinking. She'd pick up an item, hold it for 3 seconds, and ask herself a single question: is this guilt or joy? That's it. No long explanation. No calling her daughter to double check. No turning it over in her hands 12 times. And it worked. The gift she had never used, the heirloom she had no emotional bond to, the thing she only kept because it felt wrong to let them go. All of them told the truth in those 3 seconds. Her body knew before her brain could interrupt. If the first wave was guilt or dread, she placed it aside. If it sparked joy or peace, she kept it. Here's what most people don't realize, especially seniors. Guilt keeps things around longer than love does. We hold on not because we need the item, but because we feel bad letting it go. But guilt is not a legacy. It's a weight. Elnora didn't dishonor anyone by decluttering. She simply refused to let old objects dictate her present peace. Her relationships lived in her heart, not in a dusty cabinet. And with each release, she found herself breathing easier, standing taller. Ever kept something only because it was a gift? Be honest, we all have. Drop a comment if that's you. Elnora's not judging. She just wants you to know you don't have to carry guilt to honor the giver. Move number 4. Stand in stories instead of stuff. Instead of keeping the old quilt, I wrote the story behind it. When Elnora came across the quilt in the hall linen closet, she sat down right there on the floor and just stared at it. It was worn and patched in places, stitched by her mother during the first year of her marriage, back when money was tight and fabric scraps told their own history. It smelled like cedar in time, and for years, she couldn't bring herself to part with it. But she never used it. She never laid it out, never washed it. It sat in that closet, folded neatly for over 30 years. She didn't keep it because it was beautiful. She kept it because it held a story. And that's when the idea hit her. What if the memory was enough? Instead of keeping every object tied to a feeling, Elnora decided to honor the story, not the item. She took out a pen and a yellow legal pad and began to write. When her mother made the quilt, what was happening in their little farmhouse, how she used scraps from a torn Sunday dress and part of her brother's overalls. She described how it was used during her children's sick days, how her husband once wrapped their newborn in it when the power went out. It took her less than 15 minutes to write, but by the time she finished, she felt more connected to that quilt than she had in years. Then, gently, she folded the story and placed it in a keepsake box she was curating for her granddaughter. And the quilt? She gave it to a local shelter that accepted warm bedding, letting it continue its story in a new home. This wasn't about erasing memories. It was about capturing them, so they didn't vanish in a box or crumble in a closet. Seniors often struggle with letting go because they fear losing the meaning attached to things. But Elnora discovered something profound. Stories last longer than fabric. A memory shared is a legacy. A dusty item hidden in storage is not. She went on to do the same with a set of measuring cups, an old apron, a pair of garden gloves. Each one had a small story. She recorded a few in a voice memo for her grandkids to listen to later. So if you're feeling stuck between keeping and discarding, ask yourself, can I preserve the story instead of the stuff? Because sometimes legacy lives best in words, not weight. Move number 5, the no chair left behind rule. If something was taking up space where people should be sitting, moving, or living, it had to go. Elnora didn't come up with this line right away. It came to her while staring at the old love seat in her sunroom, the one completely buried under boxes and used decor and a broken lamp she kept meaning to fix. She hadn't sat in that chair in over 6 years, and she wasn't alone. Across the house, she started noticing a pattern. Chairs tucked under piles, benches covered with bags, a rocker in her bedroom taken over by laundry baskets. These weren't just neglected pieces of furniture. They were signs that her living space had silently shrunk. It's something many seniors experience without even realizing it. Rooms slowly become storage zones. Floor space turns into temporary drop zones. You find yourself navigating narrow paths instead of open, breathable rooms. And before long, the home that once welcomed visitors, grandchildren, and neighbors begins to close in around you. That's when Elnora made her new rule: no chair left behind. If it was built for a body, it needed to be clear and usable again. Every seat in her home had to be ready for life, for conversation, for company, for rest. It wasn't just about chairs either. It was a mindset, a decision to reclaim space for living instead of storing. So she cleared the sunroom first. Out went the dusty artificial ficus tree and boxes of winter linens she hadn't touched in over a decade. The love seat was vacuumed, fluffed, and angled to catch the morning light. She added a small side table and a single book she actually wanted to reread. Then something unexpected happened. Her neighbor Sylvia came by, saw the transformation, and sat down. Just like that. The first real visit in that room in years. They talked for an hour, sunlight pouring in, nothing between them but air and ease. That's when Elnora realized reclaiming space isn't just about aesthetics, it's about invitation. It tells your body, your guests, and your spirit, you're welcome here. Which room in your house needs to be reclaimed? Tell us below, because sometimes all it takes is clearing one chair to make room for joy again. Move number 6, the last room, first strategy. I started with the hardest room first, the one with my husband's books. Most decluttering guides tell you to start small. A drawer, a corner, something easy to build momentum. But Elnora had tried that. Twice. She cleaned out a kitchen drawer, sorted some socks, even emptied a small medicine cabinet. And then she stopped, because the real weight wasn't in the junk drawer, it was in the study. Her late husband's study hadn't changed since the day he died. His pipe still sat in a ceramic tray. His collection of historical biographies lined the shelves, untouched but dusted. She hadn't opened the bottom drawer of his desk in nearly a decade. And every time she passed the room, she felt a silent tug. Like that room was waiting for her to face it. Waiting for her to decide what stayed and what moved forward without him. So this time, she flipped the script. She began with the one room she'd been avoiding the longest. On the first morning of her 48-hour deadline, she opened the study door, turned on the old floor lamp, and sat in a chair. She gave herself permission not to finish it all, but just to begin. One by one, she picked up his books. Some are marked with his notes in the margins, those she kept. A few were falling apart, those she donated, along with a letter explaining his love for history. She kept the last novel he read on his nightstand, wrapped in a ribbon, and set it gently in her memory box. The rest? She let go. The process was hard. She cried, paused, took breaks. But because it came first, she had the emotional energy to face it fully. And here's the truth most people overlook. The deeper the emotional tie, the stronger your focus needs to be. And that focus is sharpest at the beginning. By starting with her heart, Elnora made every room afterward feel lighter by comparison. No small drawer could match the strength it took to part with his favorite chair or his handwriting in old file folders. And she didn't feel drained afterward. She felt cleared. So if there's a room in your house that holds your story, that's the one to begin with. The one with the most love is often the one that sets everything else free. But what Elnora did in her garage is what made her kids tear up when they saw it. Move number 7, goodbye, not storage. I didn't box up. I said goodbye. By the final stretch of her 48-hour transformation, Elnora had made a bold decision, one that even her closest friends called too final. She decided not to store anything just in case. No attic bins, no mystery boxes labeled miscellaneous, no cardboard containers collecting dust in the garage. If something wasn't going to be used, displayed, or meaningfully shared, it was time to say goodbye. This was more than decluttering. It was closure. You see, Elnora realized that most of her life, she had used storage as an emotional stall. Packing things away made her feel like she'd made progress, when in reality, she'd just postponed the decision. She called those boxes emotional IOUs. Every time she taped one shut, she was quietly telling herself, I'll deal with this later, when I'm stronger, or braver, or more ready. But later never came. So instead, Elnora cleared off her dining room table, laid out a clean tablecloth, and created something she called her letting go table. She placed items on it with care, things that had meant something once but no longer had a place in her next chapter. Books, kitchen tools, scarves, framed photos of landscapes no one recognized anymore. Each item had a little handwritten note, "Take me if you love me." No guilt, just grace. She invited her neighbors, her daughter, a few local friends. They chatted, remembered, shared stories, and slowly the items found new homes. Not because she pushed them on anyone, but because she released them with love. And the leftovers? Donated to places she respected. Not hidden in a garage, but given away intentionally with purpose. Letting go, Elnora discovered, doesn't have to feel like loss. It can feel like a blessing for someone else and for yourself. And here's the part that surprised her. Not boxing things up didn't make her feel rushed. It made her feel free. Every object she let go of was a decision made. A weight lifted. A page turned. Could you let go without boxing it up first? Think about that. Because sometimes a goodbye spoken now is kinder than a burden passed on later. Elnora's house doesn't look like it was just decluttered. It feels like it finally exhaled. The difference wasn't just visible, it was audible. On the second morning after her 48-hour purge, she walked into the hallway and paused. For the first time in years, she could hear her own footsteps echo off the walls. Not because the house was empty, but because the space had room to breathe, room to welcome, to live, to change. The sunroom, once a forgotten storage graveyard, has become her new morning retreat. She wakes early, pours a cup of tea, and sits in the wicker chair by the window with her journal. There's a gentle breeze that drifts through the open screen door, the scent of lavender from the backyard drifting in. No boxes, no clutter, just light and space and a sense of now. And her grandkids notice. What once felt like a place where they had to tiptoe around piles or dodge stacks of forgotten someday projects now feels like a home meant for them. They run freely from room to room. They laugh. They linger. And they sit with her, asking questions about old photos that are now actually on the walls instead of buried in dusty drawers. One of them even said, "Grandma, your house feels happy." That's when Elnora realized it wasn't just the space that had changed. It was her. In letting go of the objects she thought defined her past, she made room for a present that truly reflected who she was now. Open, evolving, and unburdened. There's a quiet power in choosing to live fully in the years you still have, instead of protecting the decades that already passed. Elnora didn't just sort through items. She faced memories, challenged habits, and reimagined what it means to age with intention. As she flipped the last page in her journal that morning, she smiled and said something that summed it all up. "I didn't just clear a house. I made room for the rest of my life." And if you listen closely, you'll hear the sound of a home and a heart that's finally wide open. If Elnora can do it at 74, with decades of belongings, memories, and emotion woven into every corner of her home, then you can too. She didn't have a professional organizer or a perfect plan. What she had was a reason, a little courage, and a decision to stop waiting for the right time. Your space doesn't have to feel heavy. You can reclaim your home and your peace, one bold move at a time. If this video gave you even a spark of motivation, click that like button. It tells us you're ready for change. Know someone holding on to too much? Share this with them. It might be the nudge they need. And for more real-life stories, breakthrough strategies, and encouragement tailored for life after 60, subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. Because your next chapter deserves space to grow.